everyone, and welcome to part 6 of the presentation on the circular dynamics of physiology, in this classical perspective on physiology. And physiology is just how things work, how the universe works, how it works inside our bodies, how our bodies work. So we're going to finish up. Now we've already completed the 8 hours this was supposed to be, and this one will be relatively short. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and start the slideshow. Okay, so I chose this image. It's by a woman named Deborah Chapin, who has generously given permission for us to use her beautiful images. And I think it kind of reflects what we've been doing with physiology, in that we're receiving these influences from heaven, and that's really symbolized by the sunlight, which is the Taiyang, the great Yang. Yang being the life force that's coming into our bodies continually. So what do we do now that we've really looked at this physiology? Of course, there's much more we could go into, and we do go into it in more particular ways in the graduate mentorship program, and we'll be going into it deeply in the OBGYN course, the treating women in the great turnings of their lives. But we want to kind of try to pull this together. And this has really just been about physiology. I want to kind of bring it into what about pathology, and also diagnosing pathology. Now, this is just a very brief sense of what pathology is from this perspective, from the Hongdi Neijing and from the Zhonghanlun, very brief about diagnosis. My hope is that this basic understanding from this foundational course on physiology will be something that you can bring to your understanding of other classes we have in the White Pine Circle, and lots of other studying that you'll be doing throughout your career. Okay, so health is this dynamic alignment with the time-space motions. So heaven is constantly going around the way that we've seen, and this is mirrored in our bodies. And this is what the Hongdi Neijing is trying to tell us as the text that is the book about how things work, about physiology. And also it's reflected in Zhang Zhongjing's work in the Zhonghanlun, which is really like, how does pathology show up in the body based on the Neijing, and how do we address that pathology with herbal medicine? How do we diagnose it? How do we address it? So what is health? It's this dynamic alignment where it's being mirrored in our bodies, this rhythm of time, and it's in space, our spatial position on the earth. Also, health is being permeable to these movements, meaning the intake as well as the expression out of these heavenly influences in our physical form. So we have to be permeable to life. And now we know that also means to the 6 G, that they're actually what make us. They keep us dry, they keep us damp, they keep us warm, they keep us cool. So these 6 G are just part of life, and we have to be permeable to them. And once that comes in and it creates physical form, we then express it back out again. So it's about being permeable and things being open, but it's also about being able to store the heavenly influences in our physical form. So pathology is a misalignment with the time-space motions in our spatially positioned bodies. And it also means that our spatially positioned bodies are going too fast or too slow for time. So lack of alignment means we're going too fast or too slow for time. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a really simple example, which is about sleep and waking. So time is going, the sun rises, the sun sets, the sun is relatively under the earth throughout the night and then comes up again. And we have the mirrored dynamic in our body where we wake up and we follow the sun and it gets dark and we get sleepy. We hopefully go to sleep. We stay asleep through the whole night and then wake up again. So if instead, time is moving like that, it's not going too fast or too slow, it's going in its ceaseless movement. If my body is going too fast for time, then it might be that my body wakes up at 3 a.m. and it doesn't stay slow enough to stay with the sun. The sun is still under the horizon, but my body is waking up. On the other hand, the sun might come up over the horizon and my body is too slow for time, that I am staying asleep for longer. I'm exhausted in the morning. I can't wake up with time. Another example would be in eating. There's a rhythm in our eating of taking in, digesting, moving through. And if my body is too fast for time, maybe I've got hyperactive motility that I eat and it goes through me too fast. It's not slow enough for me to be able to absorb the influences of the food and the nourishment. My body's going too fast for time, and then treatment-wise, we'd want to slow that down. On the other hand, maybe my digestion is too slow for time. It should be moving through. There's a natural rhythm that my body's not aligned with, and it's too slow for time. So in that case, I may get blockage and congestion in my digestion. So those are just really simple examples. And we can say that going too fast in terms of being permeable and also being able to store, that going too fast is being too permeable and not storing properly, and going too slow is being not permeable and storing too much. So when we're thinking about the yin-yang symbol, and I'll give a case example at the end that just illustrates one aspect of this briefly. When we're diagnosing people, we're looking for these movements, and are they going too slow or too fast for time? So healing means to be whole, and being whole means to be in relationship. To be in relationship, we must be able to be permeable and able to process what's outside of ourselves. We must be absorptive to contain that which comes in, and we must be able to express it outwardly. So in this sense of being whole, it actually means to be a part of everything, not just being whole inside kind of the envelope of my skin, but being whole in that I'm connected. I'm connected to the celestial bodies. I'm connected to other people. I'm connected to nature through food. And on the other side, in the east, I'm giving back out again. And that's part of being whole as well. So we're constantly taking in life and putting life back out. Health is being aligned with life, so the process of taking in and putting out works well. Pathology is a misalignment with time-space motions. Diagnosis is determining where we're misaligned with the flow, going in and going out. And treatment is directed towards inviting that alignment. This is so beautiful because, in a way, when we're working with people in the clinic, we're really, by aligning them, we're really getting them aligned with the forces that actually do the healing. That we don't have to do the healing. You know, in a more material view of Chinese medicine, and especially Western medicine, the doctors or the drug have to manage things and do the healing. Our view is to align things so that nature can do all the work. This is really clear to me living on a farm, and my daughter lives here and she's the farmer, and she and I have lots of conversations about these kinds of principles relative to all aspects of life, including the farming. And as a farmer, she's working with this chi as well, with wind, with rain, with damp, with cold, with heat. And her job as a farmer is to align with the coming in of those forces. And really, when you're aligned with it, how does food get grown? It gets grown by these forces. You plant a seed, you get the forces, you get right with time, you get right with those forces, and then the work is done by life, not by the farmer. The farmer's only job is to align with them, do things at the right time, in the right place, in the right amount. And that's really the same for us, that we help align people, and it's life that then does the healing. So symptoms are what indicate the particular way we're having difficulty processing life. So the symptoms are telling us which of these confirmations is going too fast or too slow, or both. So symptoms are super important as indicators. You know, so what we're trying to do with the symptoms is use the symptoms to see the underlying great sweeping motions and how they are moving. In the Tao Te Ching, it says, to find the origin, trace back the manifestations. When you recognize the children and find the mother, you'll be free from sorrow. So the reason I have this from the Tao Te Ching is that we're doing the same thing with symptoms. You know, what we have when a patient walks in is we have signs and symptoms. You know, and signs are everything from the complexion and the posture and the build of the person. The minute they walk in, we start getting information, to the things that they tell us that we get from our intake. But that's all we have, just this information coming from our patient. And we have to go from this manifestation and find the origin. You'll see that I call it the invisible realm. Because when we look at the patient, we can't see the confirmations. We can't see the great sweeping motions. But we can trace back from signs and symptoms to find out what's going on with the great sweeping motions. When you recognize the children, here, the signs and symptoms, you recognize them, and to me that means recognize them for what they actually are. Then you can find the origin, you can find the mother. And that's where you're going to have good results, which of course we love good results. It makes us happy to be able to have good results with our patients. So the visible realm and the invisible realm. Signs and symptoms are the visible realm and the exterior. But to know why the symptoms are there, you must know the invisible realm. The primary way to know about the invisible is through the visible. How do we trace back the manifestations, the visible realm, to find the origin, the invisible realm? We must not only see the invisible realm, but we must be able to articulate what we see and understand how it gives rise to the visible signs and symptoms. So the invisible realm and the visible realm. The language of the effective methods is the language of the invisible realm. So these formulas are expressing something of the invisible realm. To write a formula is to open a direction, kai feng, open a direction. And our diagnosis is of a direction in space. You'll see what I mean when we get to the case. So we have to see and articulate what's happening in the realm of space-time motions in order to match the diagnosis to the correct formula. If our language is the language of the visible realm, we won't be able to access the proper methods. So if we're just saying, you know, how do I treat psoriasis? What are the herbs for psoriasis? And we don't see the invisible realm, we won't be so effective. How do I treat headaches? How do I treat hypertension? How do I treat diabetes? If we just work with that visible realm, we won't access the proper methods. And diseases are the most visible realm. In Western medicine, symptoms are not taken seriously if the disease can't be found. Symptoms are slightly less material. In TCM, we at least take symptoms seriously as having meaning in the absence of disease. And signs are even more connected to the invisible realm. Signs are indicators we perceive with our senses that patients don't know about. So that includes abdomen, pulse, tongue, also palpating the skin, feeling the flesh, looking at the structure of the body, complexion, constitution, posture, affect. All of these are signs that we train ourselves to observe and take into account. And those are heading us a little more towards the invisible realm. So Western medicine's written in a language of the visible realm, even if what's visible is only visible under a microscope. It can't lead us to effective methods. So if we go from this very visible realm, like high cholesterol, hypertension, high blood pressure, we won't, if we try to go from that to a treatment, or COVID, how do you treat COVID? If we go from that to a method in Chinese medicine directly, we will really have bad results. TCM is also the language of Zang Fu, Qi, blood, and body fluids. This is also more of a visible realm, but less visible than Western medicine. And to me, the language of TCM diagnosing the Zang Fu, Qi, blood, and body fluids is a really important way of using the manifestation to trace back the origin. If we just stop at Zang Fu diagnosis, we won't have as good results as if we see the underlying motion behind it. So we want to access this invisible realm, and the signs and symptoms are the biao, the external manifestation. So the signs and symptoms can be misleading, but they are also what lead us, and they're easy to access. The Neijing and the Shanghemun give us symptoms. Like they talk a lot about symptoms that you'll see with various kinds of pathology. In cold damage, you'll see lack of sweating and body pain and those kinds of things. But these symptoms are actually written in as sort of a metaphorical code that unlocks the invisible room. So something like in cold damage, there's a lack of sweat is code for the surface is blocked, and therefore it's going too slow. Taiyang has to go up and out. And if it's blocked, lack of sweat means it's blocked, then it's slowing down the life force compared to what it needs to do for us to be permeable. So that's just one example, but in general, symptoms are to be read as a metaphorical code. If we read them too much as you have to have this symptom, this symptom, this symptom, you won't have access to the wisdom inherent in the Shanghemun. This is a red herring. And diseases and symptoms are the most distracting red herrings. So here is a famous quote from Sharon Weizenbaum, which is, symptoms are not always what they seem to be, but they are always what they are. So a lot of us learned in school to look at a symptom and think, what does that symptom mean? For example, loose stool, spleen deficiency. So we jump to a conclusion about what the symptom means before seeing what it actually is, which is just the stool is coming out loose. And then seeing, why is the stool coming out loose? And it may or may not be spleen Qi deficiency or Tai Yin not functioning properly. It may or may not, and you'll see in the case that I give you, someone with a loose stool who did not have spleen deficiency. So symptoms are not always what they seem to be, but they're always what they are. So in my program, we really train to see symptoms for what they are. Loose stool. It's just the stool's coming out loose. I don't know why until I do the complete diagnosis. So it's really important in being able to access the invisible realm that we don't fill it in before we get all the information, that we don't lock ourselves into a diagnosis or jump to conclusions that lead to a very complex diagnosis when actually the underlying movement might be really simple. So when we see the invisible realm, how do we correct it? We do that through flavors. The flavors are what realign with time and space in herbal medicine. In acupuncture, we use the corresponding elemental points. The points on the channels that are the wood, fire, earth, metal, water points are really what represent the root treatment in classical types of acupuncture. So, whether it's flavors or the phases of the points, that's what we use to realign the body with the time-space motions. So we have these basic 5 flavors. And I want to say that the flavors are not the taste of the herbs. They are the basic function of the herb. So if we just kind of, cook up an herb and we taste it, that's not going to necessarily give us what was meant in the classics by the flavor. The flavor is also broader in terms of the character of the herb. Like, is it a leaf? Is it a fruit? Is it a root? Is it a twig? What color is it? What does it look like? Does it have a lot of holes in it? Is it very dense? All of those characteristics tell us about the herb. And so flavor is a rather broad term. Of course, there's a narrow sense of flavor. There's also a broad sense of flavor, like who is this herb altogether? You know, what is this herb? What's it going to do? So we have these 5 flavors, and this is what we use. Of course, in the program, we go deeply into what the classics say about flavors, but here we're just touching on how is it that we, diagnose, and it's by staying clear on what symptoms are, and then how do we treat? And it's by using these flavors, because these flavors are what push things around in different directions, take them into our body, and they push things around. Okay, so I'm going to end with an insomnia case. And the reason I have a picture of Santa here is because this was kind of a jolly looking person with a red face and a really large belly. And he came with a main complaint of insomnia. So he's age 40, and he had a secondary complaint of lower back pain. Both complaints had begun 20 years previously. He'd been able to live with them, and they'd recently gotten much worse. He had a strikingly round, large belly and a very rosy face. Palpation of his belly revealed it to be full and distended, and when I pressed into the left side around stomach 27 deeply, there was a strong oketsu, which means a blood stagnation indicator. Bill had not ever associated the insomnia with the back pain, even though they came around the same time. But to me, it was interesting. The back pain began with a traumatic injury playing football 20 years previously. His stool was loose, but otherwise his digestion was normal. Urination, body temperature, and sweating were also not notable. His tongue was slightly red with noticeably distended sublingual veins. Bill's pulse was full on the right guan, wiry on the right chur, and his left pulses were all faint. So this is his intake. So first I want to look at what are things we could get distracted by here if we're looking too prematurely for what symptoms mean as opposed to what they are. Okay, so here's a pile of red herrings. First, we might think something like, oh, he's in pain. How do I stop pain? What are herbs that are going to stop pain? And that could be a red herring. Just really like no diagnosis except just pain. How can I stop pain? Another might be like, oh, he has insomnia. How can I calm his spirit and induce sleep? I'm going to give him Swanza-Rantan or something like that, because his main complaint is having trouble sleeping. I might think, oh, he's kind of fat. Maybe his spleen is damp. And then, oh, look, he has a loose stool. And I've gone down a rabbit hole that's leading me off track because I've jumped to a conclusion about what his big belly means spleen damp. And then I've bolstered my case by saying, yeah, and look, he's got a loose stool. He's got chronic low back pain. Kidney deficiency. I could think that. And then he's got these red cheeks with insomnia. Maybe it's kidney yin deficiency. So you can see how we could go off in these different directions and make a mistake. So none of these things would work for him. So what are the symptoms? And I have a picture here. Symptoms are really good guides as long as we don't jump to conclusions about what they mean. So what is back pain, the lower back pain? It means there's some stasis in his low back, right? We don't know deficiency, excess, just stasis in his back. And what is insomnia? Well, we know his yang isn't rooting at night. We don't know why yet. So for me, it's important to train my mind to just look at things for what they are. And until I see everything, I can't know how to explain the low back pain or the insomnia. He's got a red face. That means there's some yang above. He's got a full abdomen. That means there's excess in the large intestine. But there's for sure excess. Then I've got this oketsu. Well, that's blood stasis for sure. And distended sublingual veins is blood stasis. I'm also keeping in mind that this started with a trauma. That also makes sense about the blood stasis. So I have a diagnosis. It's excess Yang-Ming blood stasis. I know there's excess. I can tell for sure because it's in his abdomen. And what kind of excess? Blood stasis excess. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So Yang-Ming excess blood stasis. So I'm putting that over in the West. So I always have in mind this yin-yang symbol and how physiology works. And so we have this Yang-Ming blood stasis. And where's Yang-Ming? It's the metal of the West. So I put it over there in the West. And then once it's there, and I think about the moving yin-yang symbol, look here, boom. Oh, I can't stop the yin-yang symbol. But if you look at the yang coming down, first it goes, oops, up. And now it's going down. And it's hitting a block over there in the West. So I'm looking at the movement of yin and yang. And I see, wow, it really can't move very well. Especially I'm looking at the yang, I'm tracking the yang. How is the yang moving? Everything else is okay, but it's really blocked over there in the West. So I can now see why he has pain, of course, because he's got blood stasis in his back and abdomen. But I can also explain the insomnia because the yang has to go down in the West. If it doesn't go down in the West, it's going to stay awake. It's going to stay up. He's going to have a hard time going to sleep. So my thought with him was, I need to open up that block in the West, the blood stasis block in the West, and that's going to help with his pain. And it's also going to help with his insomnia. Now, what about the loose stool? How do we explain the loose stool? And so for me, first off, I don't know what will show up after I remove the first layer of the problem for Bill. Also, the loose stool is not a complaint of his. It's quite minor compared to the amount of pain he has and the insomnia, which have both become quite acute and disruptive in his life. So one thing I think is, I don't know why he also has a loose stool. Maybe once I clear this block, which is acute and should be cleared quickly, then I'll see what shows up in Bill after that. But also, it's not unheard of, and in fact, this is what happened in this case, that the block itself is a blood stasis block. You don't have to have it. Everything is there to show that there's an excess Yang-Ming blood stasis block. And another Sharon Weisenbaum quote is, You don't have to see everything to know what's true. So you don't need to see constipation. So we know for sure there's an excess Yang-Ming blood stasis block. That is going to mess with the easy movement in the digestion. And how it's going to mess with it can vary a lot. So if you have, somewhat of a block, like a stream that's a little dammed up, that could build up and then have sudden flushing out. Build up, flush out. And so that block itself could lead to some loose stool. Alternatively, the loose stool could be from some other cause that will become more obvious after the first main block is cleared. So then, to me, the treatment becomes revealed. The diagnosis is revealed. It's not something I had to figure out. In the previous slide, it was revealed just by looking at what the symptoms showed me when I look at them for what they are. And now the treatment is clear. I need to open up the Yang-Ming blood stasis. So the formula that I gave him was Tala Zhengqi in these amounts. We'll look then at how these flavors are working to do what we want them to do. So first I'll tell you what happened with him, which is that he got some more loose stool, but it was comfortable loose stool. He didn't have cramping or difficulty. And then actually his loose stool ended up clearing up. And in the loose stool, some dark blood came out. His back pain basically went away and he started sleeping. So we unlocked the West. We unlocked that motion. And if we go back and look at the yin yang symbol, we can see that the fire from heaven, that Shao Yin fire, that has to make it all the way down to the Shao Yin and the Taiyang cold water and nest in there. It couldn't because the mediator, Yang-Ming, was blocked. And so the fire stayed up above, harassing the heart instead of coming down. So we just did that by working with the great sweeping motion of Yang-Ming so that it could mediate between the heart and the kidneys so they could communicate with each other. And Shaoyin could then close because Yang-Ming is now open through and Shaoyin can close at night and store that yang. I hope that makes sense to people. Please feel free to ask questions if it doesn't. So let's take a look at the flavors. So what we see is that the formula is centered around the bitter flavor. And the bitter flavor descends. So primarily when we want to induce the West to go down, we're using the bitter flavor in order to do that. The bitter flavor is also said to harden, which means that the bitter flavor is going to increase the storage of the kidneys. So that also corresponds to Yang-Ming closes. So as we open that up, it's so that the Shaoyin can actually close and store. So we see Taoren, Da Huang, Mang Shao are all bitter. So then we also see that the Taoren is a greasy seed. So that is also something that descends and helps the Yang-Ming descend in general. Greasy seeds will do that. Even something like Swanzao Ren or Baizi Ren are are greasy seeds that help open up the west. Da Huang is also a yellow hard root. Yellow is the color of earth, so it opens through earth. Now, according to the Fuxing Shui, the Da Huang is also salty, and we for sure have the salty with the Mangshao. It's a type of salt. And what does the salty flavor do? Especially when it's combined with Taoren and Guizhi, which enter right into the blood, the salty flavor liquefies. So things that are chronic stasis, the salty flavor goes in and liquefies what is hardened. So we're using bitter to send that down, and we're saying there's all this congealed gook, so we're using salty to help that blood stasis flow out. Now the Guizhi is a red-green, in other words, brown twig, but red is the flavor, is the color of heart, which, or the fire element, which rules the blood circulation. And green is the color of wood, which also stores the blood. So Guizhi is an herb that innately enters right into the blood. Now, the pungent flavor in general goes up and out, but that's only going to happen in formulas that are guided by the pungent flavor, such as Ma Huang Tang or Guizhi Tang. In this case, this whole formula is guided by primarily bitter, secondarily salty. And so we're using this color of Guizhi and its pungent nature in this context. So this is going to enter the blood, and the pungent flavor is going to move the blood. And the sweet warmth also improves the blood and brings in some warmth as well, because warmth is going to help move the blood. So this case is only to show how, when we're looking at the great sweeping motions, we are using flavors to move the circle around. So, all of the formulas of the Shanghan Lun are working in this way with the circle. Now, in one way or another, they're working in this way with the circle in combination with each other to, when we determine what's going on with the circle, what the problem is, then we apply the flavors in order to correct that problem. So thank you very much for your time watching these presentations. I hope it has been interesting and illuminating, and really my hope is that it really is an inspiration to think about and contemplate our relationship with heaven and earth, to start seeing our patients as being constantly nourished by heaven and earth, and our job as practitioners to keep that connection between heaven and earth going in the best way possible. And that this helps you feel more connected to the six chi, to nature in general, to the moon, the sun, the stars, and how they work outside of us and within us. So thank you so much for your attention. Okay.